Imagine for a second your phone buzzes. You pick it up, and it's a direct call.
Right.
And the voice on the other end is familiar, it's trusted. Maybe it's a local leader, someone who's campaigned in your neighborhood for years.
Someone you feel like you know personally.
Exactly. Or maybe it's even this iconic political figure, someone from a generation ago, and they deliver this quick, very personalized message.
Tailored right to you.
Totally. To your concerns in your specific language for your local area. Now, imagine you find out later that the politician you heard, well, they passed away years ago.
Or that the voice was never theirs to begin with, just a synthetic clone.
That exact scenario, that personalized private message delivered by an AI clone, it wasn't some sci-fi plot.
Right.
It was the reality, or at least the potential reality, for millions and millions of voters in India's 2024 general election.
It's a really startling thought, isn't it? Just the sheer normalization of political cloning. And the scale of this election, I mean, it's the world's largest. You're talking about nearly 1 billion registered voters over 7 phases. It was, without a doubt, an unprecedented global stress test for democracy in the age of generative AI.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here for today. We are undertaking a deep dive into the sources you shared with us, all concerning this massive, really aggressive use of AI and synthetic media, especially deepfakes, in this monumental election.
Yeah, and this wasn't just, some isolated national event.
Yeah?
It was a functioning laboratory. It showed the world exactly how modern AI campaign tactics can scale globally, and this is the key part, often with the express approval and the funding of the political parties themselves.
The candidates approved, they were in on it.
Precisely. And what's so compelling and a little scary is that India serves as this critical predictive model for other complex democracies.
Because of its size and diversity.
Exactly. You have this rapidly digitizing population. We're talking over 850 million internet users now. So what happened there in 2024, it offers these vital insights into the structural problems the rest of the world is about to face.
And what kind of problems are we talking about?
Problems around content provenance, the ability to actually know where a piece of media came from, and more broadly, the collapse of democratic trust when high-quality, easily generated synthetic media just floods the whole information space.
So our mission today is to really get past the headlines, right?
That's a goal. To understand the how, the just astounding scale of this deployment, and critically, to unpack some of these counterintuitive findings about what its real-world impact was on voters and on democracy.
Okay, so let's start with just the sheer magnitude of this, because the money, the logistics, that really sets the stage for everything else.
It really does. I mean, we're talking about an election where the political parties combined spent an estimated $16 billion.
$16 billion? That's a staggering amount of capital.
It's almost unimaginable. And when you inject that kind of money into the digital landscape, you're creating this enormous budget for using cutting-edge AI, for outreach, for efficiency, and of course, for targeted manipulation.
And all that money, all that technology, it didn't just appear in a vacuum. It met a very specific set of, vulnerabilities within the Indian electorate.
A perfect storm, really. The sources are pretty clear that the population, while adopting digital tools very quickly, was also acutely susceptible to digital manipulation.
And there's data on that, right?
Yeah. There's older research from 2019 that keeps getting referenced. It found that nearly 70% of Indians struggled to tell the difference between real and false information online.
70%. That's an alarming figure.
It is. It suggests that the basic sort of mechanisms of digital discernment, that critical thinking muscle, it's not fully matured yet across the population.
So you have that high vulnerability, and then you couple it with the way information actually spreads in India.
Right. It's not always on a public social media feed.
No, it's these closed, trusted, private channels, things like WhatsApp and Telegram.
Exactly. And that creates the perfect environment for personalized, unscrutinized manipulation to just thrive.
And we can't forget the language component. That seems huge here.
Oh, it's absolutely central. India is a truly multilingual nation. You've got 22 official languages, but thousands of regional dialects.
Which for a traditional campaign is a massive barrier.
It's almost insurmountable manually.
Yeah.
But for generative AI, it's a spectacular opportunity.
How so?
Well, AI can be deployed to just leap over those linguistic hurdles. It can translate core messaging, you can generate dialect-specific content, and it bypasses that whole need for a one-size-fits-all national message.
It's localization at a scale that was never possible before.
That's the key. That is what really differentiates India's AI challenge from almost anywhere else.
So it feels really important then to establish what we mean when we use the word deepfake. It gets thrown around constantly.
He does.
What are we talking about in this context, and why did it become such a potent political weapon in 2024?
At its core, a deepfake is just a piece of synthetic media. A video, an audio clip, an image created using deep learning, which is a specific kind of AI,
And the goal is to make it look real.
to convincingly alter or completely fabricate content, to simulate someone saying or doing something they never actually did.
Yeah.
But the critical point here, the thing we really need to understand, is the accessibility of these tools now.
And this is where it stops being a theoretical threat, something for academics to worry about, and becomes a real-world democratic challenge.
That's it. The sources are emphatic on this point. The technological barrier to entry has virtually collapsed.
Gone.
Completely. Content that just 5 years ago would have required specialized skills, powerful computers, expensive software.
A whole production studio, basically.
Right. Now it can be generated using widely available, often free, mobile apps. You don't need to be an expert anymore. And that shift fundamentally decentralizes the threat.
Okay, help me unpack that idea, the decentralization of the threat. If the barrier is gone, who's actually making and sending this stuff?
That's the scary part. The risk shifts dramatically. It moves away from just being about these sophisticated, expensive, state-sponsored operations.
Like the classic influence campaigns we used to hear about.
Exactly. Now it's about widespread, highly adaptable manipulation campaigns that can be run by, say, a local partisan group or regional content creators, or even just a single person on their phone.
So deepfakes are no longer niche, they're just a standard political tool now.
A standard, accessible, and easily weaponized tool, used right down at the grassroots level.
So the danger vector, it goes way beyond just, a fake video being sent around.
Far beyond. It now involves the systematic erosion of trust.
Trust in what?
Trust in everything. Trust in digital media, trust in political institutions, trust in the basic factual environment we all share. When a voter can't even believe the voice on the other end of a phone call or the video clip they saw on WhatsApp, what can they trust?
And that's the long-term damage.
That erosion of epistemic trust, as it's called, that is the long-term structural threat. And India's experience here, it really needs to be seen in a global context. They weren't the only ones facing this in 2024.
Right. We saw similar issues pop up in other major elections. Can you tell us a bit more about those, just to put India's scale into perspective?
Certainly. I mean, just look at India's neighbors. You had parliamentary elections in Bangladesh and Pakistan that faced very similar challenges with synthetic media.
And in Pakistan, it was particularly interesting, right?
Yes, because it involved circumventing physical constraints. The former Prime Minister, Imran Khan, was in jail.
So he couldn't speak to his supporters.
Physically, no. So his party used a synthesized voice announcement to get his message out, to claim victory, basically from his jail cell.
Wow. That's a powerful use case, using AI to bypass physical barriers to participation.
It's a fascinating example of AI as a tool for democratic circumvention, even if the content itself wasn't necessarily fraudulent.
And then you contrast that with what we saw in the U.S.
A much lower quality but still high-impact example. During the New Hampshire primary, you had these AI-generated robocalls.
Impersonating President Biden.
Right. Urging registered Democrats to save their vote for November and not bother voting in the primary.
Which seems almost clumsy, technically speaking, compared to the really sophisticated stuff we're talking about in India.
Oh, it's low-quality AI for sure. But the strategic goal was pure voter suppression. It just goes to show that even an easily detectable fake can be effective if you deploy it at the right time to cause disruption.
So these global precedents from Pakistan to the U.S., they establish that AI in elections isn't a future problem.
It is the current reality. And India, in 2024, provided the single largest, most scaled-up example of how professional political parties are now integrating it into their core operational architecture.
So it's really clear from the source material that this wasn't just, random trolls making memes. The 2024 Indian elections showed AI being integrated into campaign strategies in a really sophisticated dual-purpose way.
Dual purpose is the perfect way to put it. This was as much about enhancing operational efficiency, just making things cheaper and faster, as it was about targeted manipulation.
And those efficiency gains, they just completely changed the math of campaigning in a country the size of India.
Fundamentally recalibrated the economics. The political parties themselves were reporting some staggering data.
Like what?
That AI-powered calls could be up to 8 times cheaper than using a traditional human call center.
8 times cheaper.
Now you multiply that saving across hundreds of millions of voters, and the cost reduction becomes this massive, self-reinforcing incentive to adopt this technology immediately and aggressively.
And beyond just the cost, the real game changer, the thing that really unlocked the scale, was this linguistic amplification. We talked about the 22 official languages.
Right, and AI essentially weaponized that diversity.
How do you mean?
Well, it allowed campaigns to translate and just rapidly create content, audio scripts, video scripts across pretty much every regional dialect.
So they could tailor the message.
Perfectly. And that amplified both their legitimate party messaging and, of course, the distorted or misleading messages. It ensured they reached this wide, regionally targeted audience that might only trust content if it's in their specific local dialect. It's mass personalization enabled by AI.
Which brings us to probably the most headline-grabbing tactic. This personalized, cloned voice targeting.
Yeah.
This moves the whole conversation from the public square, where it might get scrutinized, into this private, trusted space of a personal phone call.
And this method was so successful because it leveraged the perceived trust of hearing a known local politician's
It
voice.
feels real.
It feels personal. By delivering messages directly to a voter's phone, it bypassed public scrutiny, it bypassed centralized fact-checking, and it bypassed the skepticism people naturally have for mass media broadcasts.
And the scale of this is it's hard to get your head around. The sources say over 50 million calls were made using this AI voice cloning tech.
50 million.
Yeah.
In just the 2 months leading up to the elections in April.
And these weren't just generic robocalls. They were personalized calls from a clone of a local figure.
And the content of those calls is so important. The sources really detail this. They weren't just vote for me messages.
Yeah.
No, the content was highly contextual. It was crafted to hit these strong regional emotions.
So they focus on what? Local infrastructure problems.
Exactly. Or caste-based appeals or specific economic grievances that were unique to that one district. By using the voice and the perceived likeness of a local figure, the campaigns built this hyper-local trust that a big, national, centralized message just can't achieve.
Okay, so that's the cloned audio. But campaigns also use deepfakes for something the sources call cultural capital mining. That's a fascinating phrase. What does that mean in the Indian political context?
Cultural capital mining is the strategic use of AI to tap into these really powerful positive emotions.
Like what? Specifically nostalgia, historical respect, or this enduring loyalty that people have for foundational political figures. India, particularly in the South, has these political dynasties and figures who command almost a cult-like devotion, even decades after their death.
And you mentioned two specific examples of deceased politicians, M. Karunanidhi and J. Jayalalitha.
Yeah.
Why were they such potent targets for this?
So M. Karunanidhi was an iconic leader in Tamil Nadu, a real figurehead of the DMK party, known for his cultural contributions.
A legend, basically.
A legend. And J. Jayalalitha, known as Amma, was an incredibly powerful figure in the rival AIADMK party. Their legacies are just deeply intertwined with the identity of their parties and their states.
So by creating deepfakes of them.
By generating deepfakes of Karunanidhi or Jayalalitha endorsing a current candidate, the campaigns were deliberately trying to transfer that deceased leader's immense cultural and political capital, all their loyal voters, directly to his successor.
So they're literally extending their influence beyond the grave. It's a highly sophisticated psychological tool. It's designed to manipulate these deeply held loyalties.
But the use of AI wasn't always so serious, right? It was also used for humor, for satire, for political scorn.
Absolutely. And that blurs the line between what's a legitimate parody and what's a calculated attempt to discredit someone.
And what did that look like?
It served the dual purpose of being entertaining while also normalizing synthetic media. We saw these fake videos everywhere of opposition leaders singing or dancing inappropriately in jail.
Right.
Or these very polished parody videos that were mocking Prime Minister Modi by changing song lyrics to suggest he was, compromised or in the pocket of big corporations.
And when the political actors themselves are using deepfakes for mudslinging, it just reinforces that idea that you can't trust anything you see online.
Which, as we said, contributes directly to that broader structural erosion of trust.
It's creating cover for the really dangerous stuff.
And that normalization is the perfect cover for the most dangerous content. Outright polarization and incitement.
And the sources show this wasn't just some fringe activity.
Not at all. Meta, the company that owns WhatsApp and Facebook, was documented to have approved 14 AI-generated electoral ads.
Approve them.
Approved them. Ads that featured highly incendiary Hindu supremacist language. We're talking explicit calls for violence against Muslims and against opposition leaders.
Meta approved ads with hate speech that were generated by AI. That seems like a massive systemic failure on the platform's part, even before the content goes viral.
It certainly points to one. And this type of highly polarized incendiary messaging, it was mostly spread through the less regulated platforms.
The messaging apps again?
Primarily. And it was often shared by local, trusted content creators or partisan proxies.
So it's leveraging those trusted relationships. Your neighbor or your friend forwards you the message.
Exactly. It uses that trusted interpersonal relationship to get extreme content to these highly targeted regional audiences. That vector is one of the most significant mechanisms for democratic harm that we saw in the entire 2024 cycle.
So to just sort of sum this section up, the politicians, the major political parties, they weren't just passive victims of this stuff.
Not in the slightest.
They were sophisticated, they were willing, and they were very well-funded customers and deployers of this technology. They used it for efficiency, but also for this highly targeted, emotional, partisan, and sometimes even incendiary messaging.
They approved it. They funded the whole bombardment.
Okay, so we've established the scale. $16 billion spent. Millions of cloned voice calls, extensive use of these nostalgic and polarizing deepfakes. The entire system was just under bombardment.
Total bombardment.
So the big question we have to ask is, did any of it actually work? Did it change the election? Because the sources seem to suggest that the misinformation apocalypse we all expected didn't quite happen.
And that is the core paradox of the Indian election, and maybe of all elections, in this new AI era. Despite the widespread aggressive use of this tech and all the initial fears that it would cause these dramatic electoral disruptions, the consensus that's emerging from the data is that the anticipated outsized effects on voter behavior were actually pretty constrained during the 2024 cycle.
Let's get into the hard numbers on that. The sources talk about this massive collaborative fact-checking effort during the election, the Shakti Collective. What did they actually find?
The Shakti Collective analyzed thousands and thousands of pieces of flagged misinformation. And they found this one crucial, really surprising piece of data.
Which was?
Only about 2% of all the content they fact-checked was verifiably an AI-generated deepfake.
2%. That means 98% of the misinformation was just the old-fashioned stuff.
Exactly. Traditional non-AI propaganda. Text-based stuff, miscontextualized images, old video clips being recycled.
2% is just. It's astonishingly low, especially when you put it next to the 50 million cloned voice calls.
It is.
It suggests that the influence of generative AI was really overshadowed by these traditional sources of influence and, maybe most importantly, by the actions of the politicians themselves. You know, their willingness to spread misinformation the old-fashioned way.
Correct. The consensus view that's emerging from all this analysis is something they're now calling the overestimation thesis.
The overestimation thesis.
Yeah, right. And this thesis basically argues that these deep-seated persistent factors that shape how people vote, things like caste, religion, local history, long-term party loyalty, those things ultimately outweigh the influence of a short-term, flashy piece of AI-generated content.
So mass persuasion is just hard.
It's really hard, especially if the message doesn't already align with a voter's existing preferences or values.
Okay, but hang on. If 50 million people got a personal phone call from what they thought was a trusted local leader, how can we be so confident that the effect was marginal? Are we maybe underestimating the damage that doesn't just show up in the final vote count?
That is an absolutely critical challenge to the overestimation thesis. We have to make a distinction between the immediate electoral outcome and the cumulative psychological damage.
Okay.
So while the AI bombardment might not have flipped millions of votes, because human decision-making is pretty resilient, it caused massive structural damage. And the most worrisome long-term consequence isn't a messed-up ballot box. It's the systematic erosion of epistemic trust.
Can you define epistemic trust for us, just in simple terms?
Sure. Epistemic trust is basically the public's confidence in their own ability to know what's true, to distinguish fact from fiction, to believe the information they're consuming is genuine.
So if people are struggling to tell the difference between what's real and what's synthetic,
even if they ignore 98% of it, that difficulty intensifies polarization, it breeds cynicism, and it structurally undermines their confidence in democratic institutions over the long run. It's like 1,000 small, steady leaks in the foundation rather than one big flood.
And this brings us back to that psychological mechanism we talked about earlier, confirmation bias.
It's exactly. If you're a committed partisan and you get a malicious video from a source you trust, or one that just perfectly confirms what you already believe, how much does the technical authenticity of that video really matter to you?
It matters very little. It might even have an inverse effect. The analysis suggests that AI's main impact is just validating and strengthening the political biases people already have.
So in a low-trust environment like India's,
When content, even if it's dubious or synthetic, is delivered through a trusted channel, like a WhatsApp message from a friend, and it validates your worldview, you often trust the content more than you question its dubious origin.
so a high-quality deepfake doesn't automatically win people over.
Not at all. High content quality doesn't mean increased demand or persuasive success. The content that succeeds is the content that perfectly resonates with someone's pre-existing identity and bias.
Which implies that all the high-tech regulatory solutions we're about to talk about, like technical labeling, are basically trying to solve a technical problem.
When the real adaptive problem is entirely psychological.
And this systemic confusion, this mismatch, it leads directly to another major source of structural damage, something called the liar's dividend.
The liar's dividend, that's a very provocative name. Explain that for us.
The liar's dividend is the perverse political benefit that a politician can get from the mere existence of highly realistic, common deepfakes.
How does that work?
Well, because synthetic media is now so commonplace, it adds this powerful new tool to the arsenal of denial. A politician who gets caught on camera doing something wrong, an authentic, unfavorable, damaging video of them taking a bribe or making a controversial comment.
They can just claim it's fake.
They can simply dismiss the authentic material as an AI deepfake fabricated by the opposition.
So the very existence of AI fakes muddies the water enough to create plausible deniability even for genuine misdeeds.
Exactly. The politician gets to harvest the dividend, the benefit of all that pervasive distrust. The fact that high-quality fakes exist allows them to evade accountability for authentic wrongdoing. And that is a devastating structural threat to the foundation of democracy, no matter who wins the election.
So given the sheer scale of all this and the structural damage we're talking about, it's clear that India's government and its regulatory bodies took this threat seriously. They didn't just sit back and wait.
No, they moved pretty quickly. The sources highlight that a major non-consensual deepfake that targeted a famous actress, Rashmika Mandanna, really acted as a kind of jarring wake-up call.
It accelerated the whole regulatory response.
It's a critical insight into the politics of regulation, really. That personal gendered harm, a very high-profile violation of someone's dignity and privacy, created the public and political urgency they needed to legislate against the more abstract threat of political deepfakes.
So what happened after that incident?
Well, the Indian government and the Election Commission, the ECI, they moved fast to amend the Information Technology Rules of 2021, aiming to curb harmful digital content, which now included synthetic media.
And let's get into the details of those mandates, because they really show an attempt to enforce rapid accountability, especially during the election period.
They do. The ECI directed all the political parties to refrain from using deepfakes that could disrupt a level playing field. And they mandated that all synthetic content had to carry a prominent label.
And the takedown timelines were pretty aggressive.
Extraordinarily aggressive. It really highlights the sense of urgency. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, or MeitY, initially mandated that what they call significant social media intermediaries, or SSMIs, had to remove deepfakes within 36 hours of a complaint.
And what are these SSMIs, just for clarity?
So SSMIs are just the major social media platforms and the big messaging apps. They're defined by their user base, so think WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, now X. The platforms with a huge footprint in India, they're the main targets of this regulation.
And you said the timeline was even shorter during the election itself.
Much shorter. During the sensitive model code of conduct period, the ECI directives demanded that political parties take down posts that violated the code within an almost impossibly tight 3 hours.
3 hours. That's practically real time.
It shows the differential urgency.
Yeah.
But the big question was, how are they going to fit this brand new, complex technical threat into India's existing legal system?
And the strategy was to retrofit and modernize what they already had.
Exactly. They used existing frameworks like the Information Technology Act, but they also brought in newer legislation. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act, or DPDPA, from 2023 was used to impose these massive penalties.
We're talking huge fines.
Huge, up to ₹250 million for non-consensual personal data breaches, which now included creating and using deepfakes. It shows how serious they were about creating an economic deterrent.
And they updated the criminal code as well.
They did. The Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, or BNS, from 2023, effectively modernizes the definition of crimes like impersonation, forgery, and defamation to explicitly cover synthetic media.
So it's not just a fine, you could face criminal charges.
Absolutely. They tried to create this comprehensive deterrent system, massive financial penalties for the platforms under DPDPA, and potential criminal consequences for the individuals under BNS.
But even with all that regulatory intent, the sources point to this huge fundamental difficulty, a technical mismatch between verification and generation.
This is the regulatory black hole. The framework requires these SSMIs, these big platforms, to deploy reasonable and proportionate technical measures to verify a user's declaration that the content they're uploading isn't synthetic.
And what's the problem with that?
The problem is that it's technically impossible to do at scale, in real time. There is no single, reliable, universal technology that can definitively detect all forms of AI-generated content.
Because the generative models are always evolving.
They're always a step ahead. A detection tool trained to spot artifacts in a deepfake made last month will probably fail to spot a deepfake made with a newer, better model this month. It makes the government's mandate vague and technically unachievable for the platforms trying to police billions of pieces of content.
So we're left with what you could call the labeling paradox. The policymakers assume that a visible label, which they mandated, has to cover at least 10% of the screen, will just solve the problem.
Right. Just by declaring the content is fake or synthetic.
But that doesn't work.
It's a classic case of applying a technical patch to a deeply adaptive human problem. Experts argue this is destined to fail at what they call the last mile of implementation, the human brain.
Because of confirmation bias.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As we establish, deepfakes go viral because they resonate with what you already believe, not because they're technically perfect. In a highly partisan environment, a warning label is often seen not as a fact, but as an attempt by an enemy platform or the government to censor their truth. The labeling just isn't enough for cognitive security.
And on top of all these technical hurdles, the Indian legal system actually put some important boundaries in place around free speech.
Yes, preventing the state from having too much control over what counts as truth. The government tried to set up a centralized fact-check unit, an FCU.
And that was struck down.
Struck down by the Bombay High Court as unconstitutional. That judicial constraint is vital for preventing regulatory overreach.
Why did the court strike it down?
They cited concerns that the amendment setting up the FCU was just too broad, it was too vague, and it risked chilling free speech. The judiciary basically recognized that while you need countermeasures for deepfakes, they have to be carefully calibrated so they don't become tools for state-sponsored censorship.
So the government doesn't get a monopoly on defining misinformation.
Precisely. And that precedent mandates judicial oversight, ensuring that any policy response has to address the real harms without just crushing political debate.
So India's really rapid, localized, and technically challenging regulatory approach, it seems to reflect this global struggle to regulate AI in elections. How does India's strategy really compare to what we're seeing in other major democracies like the US and the European Union?
You're really seeing three very divergent strategies play out on the global stage. The U.S. approach is, well, it's highly fragmented, and it's fundamentally constrained by very stringent free speech jurisprudence, specifically the First Amendment.
Which leads to what, exactly?
It leads to largely symbolic regulation and constant legal challenges against state laws. You have about 18 states that have tried to pass laws against election deepfakes, but many of them are facing injunctions, or they're just being interpreted very narrowly.
So in the U.S., the focus often ends up being on prosecuting a secondary crime, like voter suppression or illegal robocalls, not the deepfake content itself.
Exactly. The focus defaults back to existing laws. So for the New Hampshire robocalls, they punished the perpetrators for call spoofing, not for the core content fraud. It's an approach that prioritizes protecting the political debate, often at the expense of cognitive security.
And then you contrast that with the European Union model, which seems way more systemic and holistic.
Oh, the EU model is comprehensive. They're leveraging two major pieces of legislation. The Digital Services Act, or DSA, which imposes rules on platforms for content moderation, and the Artificial Intelligence Act, the AI Act.
And the AI Act classifies systems based on risk, right?
Yes, and that's the key. It classifies AI systems on a spectrum: minimal, limited, high, and unacceptable risk.
And where do election systems fall?
Systems used to influence elections are generally classified as high risk. And what that means is that platforms have to proactively identify and mitigate systemic harm, rather than just reacting to individual pieces of bad content after the fact.
So it's structural.
It's a structural focus on minimizing systemic harm. And that really differentiates the EU's approach from both the fragmented U.S. approach and India's retrofitted content removal approach.
So the sources seem to be suggesting that relying on just the traditional policy toolbox platform, moderation, content takedowns, even labeling, it's just not adequate for the AI era.
It's fundamentally inadequate. We have to completely shift our perspective.
For what?
It's imperative that we reframe the problem. It's no longer a content moderation problem. It's a communication governance problem.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means focusing on the flow, the provenance, and the collaborative responsibility for the integrity of information. And that requires adopting a kind of hybrid co-regulatory model where the state sets clear, judicially sound guidelines, but the responsibilities are shared collaboratively between the industry platforms, civil society, and the users themselves.
And given that we know real-time deepfake detection is failing, let's go back to that idea of tracing the source of the content. What's the technological solution there?
Policymakers have to move aggressively toward mandating content provenance standards, something like the ones being developed by C2PA.
C2PA, what is that?
It's the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity.
And in simple terms, what does content provenance mean for an average user scrolling on their phone?
It means establishing a clear, verifiable chain of custody for digital media. C2PA is developing technical standards that let a content creator, or even the AI model itself, embed cryptographic metadata right into the file.
Like a digital watermark.
Potentially, yes. A tamper-proof record that's embedded at the moment of creation. This record shows when it was created, where it was created, like which AI model or user account, and if it has been modified since.
So it's not a silver bullet, but it gives you a way to trace things back.
It provides an essential mechanism for accountability and for rapid identification of the source of manipulation, which is critical when things are spreading so fast through encrypted apps like WhatsApp. If a fake goes viral, we need to find the original actor, not just the platform where it ended up.
And politically, we also need institutional countermeasures, because a one-by-one fact-checking approach can never keep up with a 50 million call bombardment.
Absolutely not. Support for independent cross-sectoral fact-checking collectives is essential. In India, you have groups like the Misinformation Combat Alliance, or MCA.
And what do?
They bring together data journalists, civil society groups, and local media organizations. And these coalitions are vital because they can develop rapid, nonpartisan detection and contextualization that's tailored to localized, multilingual deepfakes during an intense election.
They get the local context that a global platform team might miss.
Exactly. The dialect, the cultural nuances.
So ultimately, given this confirmed psychological mismatch where our own human bias consistently beats a technical label, what is the most durable, the most foundational defense against all of this?
Cognitive security. The single most durable defense is a massive, long-term, and sustained investment in critical thinking and digital literacy.
So education.
Education, but a specific kind. Policymakers have to prioritize enhancing what you could call generative AI literacy among citizens, educators, parents.
And what would that look like?
Programs that focus on teaching the public not just what a deepfake is, but how to identify manipulative intent, how to critically evaluate sources, and how to contextualize generative AI content, including all the nuances of cloned audio. Without that foundational human resilience, any labeling law, any legal sanction, any platform moderation effort is going to inherently fail at the level of the human brain. And the human brain is the final target of all this manipulation. Hashtag outro.
So this deep dive has really established that the 2024 Indian election was a unique kind of laboratory.
It really was.
It successfully demonstrated AI's just stunning power for personalized, multilingual political outreach. I mean, that figure of 50 million cloned voice calls is just staggering.
A capability that politicians openly funded and approved. They did. But it also revealed the limitations of our current technical solutions against these deeply ingrained human biases and the powerful resilience of low-tech traditional misinformation.
Right.
The consensus, therefore, is that the long-term battle isn't really about AI changing immediate election results. that predicted AI apocalypse was, in terms of immediate impact, largely overestimated.
So what is the real enduring threat?
The real threat is the steady, structural erosion of the shared factual environment that a democracy needs to function. It's a crisis of epistemic trust, and it's made so much worse by the liar's dividend. The scale of the AI deployment just far outpaced the short-term, measurable electoral impact. And that indicates this dangerous gap between our technological capability and our understanding of its human consequences.
As we wrap up, I want to go back to that critical moment we discussed.
Yeah.
The high-profile, non-consensual deepfake incident that targeted the actress Rashmika Mandanna.
A key moment.
The sources really emphasized that these high-profile violations of personal dignity and privacy, especially gendered harm and sexualized deepfakes, they acted as policy accelerators. They generated the political will that was needed to legislate against the more abstract systemic threat of political deepfakes.
And this raises a really important final question for you, the learner, and for policymakers everywhere. If electoral integrity and the functional stability of democracy are the ultimate targets of AI regulation,
Yeah.
why do we seem to require these immediate visceral threats to personal dignity and psychological harm, which often disproportionately affect women and children, to be the necessary catalyst for democratic protective measures? It suggests that the abstract, systemic threat to the election itself often struggles to motivate political action until a concrete, deeply personal violation forces public outrage and regulatory urgency.
That dynamic.
That dynamic, the necessity of personal violation to achieve systemic security, is a profound structural challenge for the entire future of cognitive security.